living in a society where your very identity is defined by those who oppress you, where your history is wiped clean and your own mind. Well, it's turned into the most powerful weapon against you. Today, we're diving deep into that kind of world, exploring the really profound movement of Black consciousness.
That's right, a powerful philosophy forged, really, in the crucible of apartheid South Africa. And it was largely articulated through the searing insights of a figure whose legacy just continues to resonate. Steve Biko.
And we've got some incredible source material for this.
Indeed. Our sources for this deep dive are, well, exceptionally rich. We're drawing extensively from key excerpts found in our background notes and a specific text, Black Consciousness, Critique, Rejection, and Vision for Liberation. And alongside that, extensive selections from Biko's own seminal work, I Write What I Like.
Including his testimony at the Say OBPC trial. That's powerful stuff.
Exactly. His powerful and defiant testimony. These texts, they really give us an unparalleled window into the mind, the mission of a movement that fundamentally redefined liberation.
So our mission today really is to extract the most important nuggets, the key insights from these profound sources. We want to understand how Black consciousness rigorously critiqued those existing oppressive structures, how it asserted a new, authentic identity for Black people, and how it envisioned a fundamentally transformed non-racial society.
Yeah, it's about getting to the heart of it.
It's kind of a shortcut, right? To being deeply well-informed about a movement whose lessons, frankly, resonate far beyond South Africa. It gives you a powerful framework for understanding systemic oppression and, well, the enduring fight for true liberation really anywhere.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this then. At its heart, what exactly is Black consciousness? I mean, what was its fundamental purpose, its ultimate vision for a new South Africa?
Right, so at its core, Black consciousness, or BC as it's often called, it proposes a pretty radical vision for a future liberated South African society. And this wasn't just tinkering around the edges, right? It aimed for a fundamentally non-racial, profoundly just, and truly egalitarian society. A complete shift.
Rooted in African values, you mentioned.
Deeply rooted in authentic African values, yeah. And seeking the full realization of the humanity of all his people. It's really crucial to grasp that BC wasn't presented merely as like a political ideology or a checklist of demands. It was framed as a foundational, almost spiritual shift in perception, in self-affirmation for Black people.
Okay.
Its ultimate goal, as Biko put it, was to create a society where man is nothing else but man for his own sake. A place where artificial things like race, creed, color, they just cease to be points of reference or division.
That sounds incredibly ambitious. A complete societal overhaul, like you said. But given how deep the roots of apartheid were, I mean, institutionally, how do you even begin to achieve something that monumental? You mentioned it starts somewhere more fundamental. Psychological liberation. Can you unpack that? What did that actually mean in the day-to-day lives of Black people under apartheid?
That's exactly where BC began its revolutionary work. The most crucial aim was to liberate Black people from what Biko called psychological oppression.
Okay.
And this wasn't just, feeling down or being sad. It was a deep, pervasive conditioning. It systematically instilled an inferiority complex and a profound sense of self-negation within Black individuals.
Right.
Imagine growing up where everything around you, the media, the schools, everyday interactions, the laws, the economy, everything constantly tells you that your Blackness is inherently lesser, a deficit, something to overcome. This constant barrage, it created a deeply ingrained belief in one's own inadequacy, a form of self-hatred, really, that BC confronted head-on. Biko's writing captures this so powerfully. He said BC sought to, quote, pump back life into his empty shell, to infuse him with pride and dignity.
Wow.
It directly challenged that pervasive idea that white somehow equaled good or normal, asserting instead that Blackness was deliberate, complete, and inherently valuable.
So a fundamental revaluing.
A complete revaluing, this self-rediscovery, this cultivation of pride. Biko argued they were absolutely essential for Black people to become co-architects, he said, of a normal society, not just passive recipients waiting for change.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. This wasn't just about feeling better inside, was it? It was about challenging those deeply embedded societal messages that, well, they got into everything, even something as personal as beauty standards. How did BC tackle that? That seems so insidious.
Exactly. It was incredibly insidious. And BC tackled it directly. It meant confronting the pervasive belief pushed by media, by society, that, quote, Beauty can only be approximated by them if the skin is made as light as possible and the lips are made as red as possible and their nails are made as pink as possible, and so on.
So basically, beauty meant looking more white.
Precisely. Beauty was defined by proximity to whiteness. So the slogan, "Black is beautiful," it wasn't just some fleeting phrase. It was a radical act of self-reclamation.
Right.
In a society that systematically taught Black people to despise their own appearance, their own heritage, this simple affirmation, it became a profound act of defiance. It forced a complete reevaluation of centuries of internalized inferiority. It was telling the Black person, man, you are okay as you are. Begin to look upon yourself as a human being. Just fundamentally human.
That's powerful.
And Biko also eloquently highlighted how the English language itself,
Hmm.
being completely foreign and the language of the oppressor,
Mm.
how it contributed to this psychological conditioning.
Right.
Well, he pointed out how the word black in English literature, in common usage, is normally in association also with negative aspects. Think about it. Black market, black sheep of the family, black magic.
Yeah, you're right. Anything bad is black.
Exactly. And he argued this wasn't just, an idiom thing. It actively reinforced self-censure, especially when, as he put it, quote, whiteness goes with angels, goes with, God, beauty.
The contrast is stark.
Incredibly stark.
Mm.
So BC aimed to reinterpret even these negative connotations of the word black, to elevate it to a position where we can look upon ourselves positively. The ultimate goal here, again, was freeing the mind of the oppressed. As Biko famously asserted, the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed.
That quote always hits hard.
It really does. It shifts the whole battlefield, doesn't it? From
Yeah.
this just physical confrontation to the psychological realm. It argues that true liberation begins right there, when the oppressed dismantle the mental chains the system imposed. BC aimed to let the Black man see himself as a being complete in himself, to make him less dependent and more free to express his manhood.
That's a powerful articulation of how internal liberation is foundational. Okay, so once individuals begin that journey of self-affirmation, how did Black consciousness translate that into collective action? It sounds like unity was a really big piece of this.
Absolutely. Building right on that psychological liberation, BC then emphasized the critical importance of Black unity and group power. Bia argued that if white racism was the thesis, the dominant oppressive force, then the only effective antithesis had to be solid Black unity.
So a direct response.
A direct strategic response. This wasn't just about, feeling good together. It was a strategic move to directly counterbalance the existing power imbalance. It meant Black people had to, quote, rally together with his brothers around the cause of their oppression, the blackness of their skin, and to operate as a group to rid themselves of the shackles that bind them to perpetual servitude.
Using the very thing used against them, their Blackness, as a unifying force.
Precisely. Turning it from a source of shame into a source of strength and unity. This unity was absolutely crucial, Biko argued, for them to speak with a definite voice and bargaining from a position of strength in any future dealings. And it explicitly rejected tribalism and other sectional divisions, Zulu, Xhosa, PD divisions that had been deliberately imposed and exploited by the apartheid system precisely to fragment Black resistance.
Divide and conquer.
The classic colonial strategy. Instead, BC aimed for one united whole toward attainment of an egalitarian society for the whole of Azania. That's the name they adopted for a liberated South Africa, promoting a shared identity based on the shared experience of oppression.
Okay, so we've got psychological liberation, Black unity. What about culture and history? You mentioned it earlier. It sounds like more than just, remembering old songs or traditions. It seems like a comprehensive reevaluation, almost a recreation of what it meant to be African in that context.
Precisely. Another vital pillar of Black consciousness was the reclamation and really the redefinition of African culture and history. BC aimed to counteract the deliberate distortion and, frankly, the destruction of African culture and history by colonialists. They'd effectively written Black people out of their own narrative or painted them as savages.
Erasing their past to control their future.
Exactly. So BC sought to rewrite the history of the Black man and to produce in it the heroes who form the core of the African background. We're talking about monumental figures like Shaka, the legendary Zulu founder, Moshushu, the astute unifier of the Basotho, Hinsa, a powerful Xhosa king.
Restoring those figures.
Absolutely. By highlighting these leaders, their achievements, BC sought to restore a positive image of the Black past, a narrative of strength, ingenuity, resilience, a narrative colonialism had deliberately tried to erase.
Because the dominant story was very different.
Oh, completely. The dominant narrative had reduced African history to, as Biko noted, a long lamentation of repeated defeats. It portrayed African culture as barbarism and African people as lacking ambition, only interested in sex and drink. Just awful stereotypes. BC aimed to restore a positive cultural heritage by highlighting genuine virtues of indigenous African cultures. Things like the profound oneness of community, the ease of communication in communal living, and a truly man-centered society.
Man-centered. How did they define that?
Meaning a society that fundamentally prioritized human relationships and collective well-being over, say, Western individualism and materialism. Biko actually drew a sharp contrast. He talked about the typical Western visitor asking, "What can I do for you?" versus the intrinsic African communal sharing, where curiosity was seen as a genuine desire to participate and share in whatever was happening.
That shift from "what can I do for you" to inherent communal sharing. That's quite profound. How did that play out in daily life, beyond just that initial interaction?
Well, connecting this to the broader picture, Biko noted how African music, unlike a lot of Western focus on solos, consists mainly of group songs. Tunes were adapted to suit the occasion, he said, and had the wonderful effect of making everybody read the same things from the common experience.
Music as a communal bond.
Exactly. Not just entertainment, but a shared expression of joy, sorrow, defiance. Even in profound suffering, like when creating Negro spirituals, Africans derive strength from that deep feeling of togetherness. This collective identity is stretched into economic and social structures too. Traditional African attitudes to property, for instance, they involved village communities, joint ownership. Land, for example, belonged to the people, controlled by the chief on their behalf, not owned privately by individuals.
Very different from Western property concepts.
Very different. It illustrates that unindividualistic nature Biko talked about. And as a result, he argued, poverty as we know it was almost a foreign concept. It only really appeared due to adverse climate affecting the whole community, not because of individual economic failure.
Fascinating.
So this cultural reclaiming, it was fundamental. Fundamental to rebuilding self-worth and rejecting that bastardized culture that just mimicked white norms and imposed Western values. Instead, it fostered a dynamic culture of defiance, self-assertion, and group pride and solidarity. It was about innovating, developing a new, modern African culture, one responsive to present challenges, but deeply rooted in those traditional values of human-centeredness and community.
Okay, so this wasn't just about building up Black pride internally. It was also a really powerful, no-holds-barred critique of everything that existed at the time. It sounds like Black consciousness wasn't shy about pointing fingers, saying the whole system was fundamentally flawed and needed radical change, not just tweaks.
Absolutely. No shyness at all. Black consciousness fundamentally critiqued the existing power structures and previous attempts at social change. It asserted unequivocally that white racism was the root cause of all oppression in South Africa, period. Therefore, genuine liberation could only come through Black unity and self-determination. And this meant explicitly rejecting the legitimacy, the methods of white-dominated institutions, and any token reforms the regime might offer.
And they saw white society as collectively responsible.
Collectively culpable, yes, for maintaining a system where they enjoyed unearned privilege. That was a core part of the critique. So the critique of white power structures. It starts with the basic assertion that white people held a privileged position they simply didn't deserve, a position they tried to justify with deceptive theories like separate freedoms or later the Bantustans.
Right, the homeland policy.
Yes, exactly. The fundamental problem, according to BC, was white racism. And Biko described it as working with an unnerving totality. It operated on both offense, actively enforcing white supremacy, and defense, protecting it.
Yeah.
This institutionalized racism created the very inferiority complex and self-negation that BC was trying to cure. You saw it from childhood, the stark contrast Biko mentioned between shabby Black schools compared to well-equipped white ones.
Yeah.
And that systemic disadvantage just continued into adulthood. Black workers were essentially forced to live to work, as Biko put it, lacking peace, often taking out their frustrations on their families because their labor was exploited solely for white benefit.
A cycle of deprivation.
A vicious cycle. And the system deliberately denigrated Black culture and history, remember, presenting it as barbarism, making African children internalize this view, hate their own heritage. Economic exploitation was just inherent, pervasive, wealth concentrated almost entirely in white hands, Black people serving as cheap, disposable labor. Black money flowed one way into white businesses, creating constant material want and a compounded spiritual poverty.
And fear was a major tool.
A primary tool. The government deliberately used fear. backed by brutal police force, repressive laws. It was all designed to control black people, suppress any resistance, make them timid and unable to assert their manhood, in Biko's words.
Which connects back to the psychological liberation point.
Exactly. It's all interconnected. And Biko went further, arguing all whites are deemed collectively culpable.
Why? That's a strong statement.
It is. His reasoning was that even the most downtrodden white worker benefited from protective laws, better wages, and crucially, the right to vote to maintain the system. They were beneficiaries, whether they actively supported apartheid or not. Even the white opposition parties, like the United Party or the Progressive Party, they were dismissed as ultimately serving white interests. The Progressive Party, for instance, despite sounding more liberal, was seen by BC as a white party at heart, fighting for a more lasting way of preserving white values, not actually dismantling the racist structure.
So no aspect of white society was seen as truly outside that system of privilege.
According to the BC critique, no. It was a comprehensive indictment.
That's a really powerful and maybe for some listening, an uncomfortable assertion that all whites were collectively culpable. But it also leads to another really insightful point you touched on. The idea that white liberals, even with seemingly good intentions, were actually seen as part of the problem. That really challenges the simple narrative of good guys and bad guys.
It does. And it raises crucial questions about allyship, about the potential for unintended harm. Black consciousness viewed white liberals as often claiming a sort of monopoly on intelligence and moral judgment.
How so?
Well, trying to dictate the pace and the direction of black aspirations, rather than genuinely empowering black people to lead their own struggle. BC explicitly rejected integration if it was artificial, or if it just meant assimilation into white norms. Biko called that a one-way course, where whites always dominated. He argued it mainly served to salve the consciences of the guilt-stricken white, while acting as a soporific, a calming agent for blacks, lulling them into thinking progress was happening without real fundamental change.
He had that famous critique of the Tea Parties, right?
Exactly. The famous critique of the liberal Tea Parties, where they'd call a few intelligent and articulate blacks to come around for tea at home, where all present ask each other the same old hackneyed question, how can we bring about change in South Africa?
Implying it was all talk, no real action or shift in power.
Precisely. He argued that true, meaningful integration could only happen after black people had asserted themselves, achieved a position of strength that commanded mutual respect. Not before. Liberals were accused of deliberate evasiveness and unwillingness to truly sacrifice their own privileges. Their protests, Biko observed, often appealed to the white conscience, aiming to convince the white electorate to maybe give a place at the white man's table.
Rather than dismantling the table itself.
Exactly. Rather than dismantling the table and building a new, equal one. BC was unwavering on this. White liberals needed to step back, let blacks handle their own affairs. Their job was to combat white racism within their own white society, where they actually had influence and could make a difference.
That's a radical departure from earlier movements that often sought white-liberal partnership.
A very radical departure. It was about black self-reliance and autonomy.
And connecting this to the political landscape, BC was equally scathing about any attempt to work within the system, especially that Bantustan policy. What was seen as so fundamentally wrong with that approach?
Right, this is crucial to understanding BC's stance. Complete rejection of working within the system, particularly the Bantustans, the so-called homelands. This policy was seen as a gigantic fraud. Biko called it the greatest single fraud ever invented by white politicians.
Strong words. Why such a harsh judgment?
Because its true purpose was seen as deeply insidious, deceptive. It was designed, BC argued, to fragment black resistance. By forcibly creating these tribal divisions, your Zulu, your Xhosa, your Pedi, and then shunting black people into these pseudo-political platforms within only 13% of the land.
While whites kept the other 87%.
Exactly. And those Bantustan leaders, figures like Matanzima, Buthelezi, Mangope, who chose to participate in these structures, they were unequivocally condemned by BC, called sellouts or pawns in a white man's game.
Even if they sometimes sounded defiant.
Even then. Because their very participation, BC argued, gave a false sense of sanctity, of respectability to an inherently oppressive system. It confused the masses, misled them. BC advocated for black people to completely pull out of these apartheid institutions, focus energy instead on genuine community work, self-reliance. Because these Bantustan platforms were seen as fundamentally designed to divert black energy towards false prescribed freedoms that only served the white regime.
Okay. And what about previous Black leadership or organizations? Was there a critique there too?
Yes, there was. Black consciousness also delivered a sharp critique of some traditional black leadership in previous liberation organizations. They observed that many earlier black student organizations had failed, either because of rigid ideological loyalties that created internal splits or because of white dominance within multiracial groups where black voices just got drowned out.
The power dynamics were unequal.
Fundamentally unequal. And then a dangerous vacuum was created after the banning of the major black political parties, the ANC and POC, back in 1960. This vacuum allowed white organizations to largely take over the opposition role, further sidelining black agency. Some early black leaders were seen, perhaps unfairly sometimes, but this was the BC perspective, as too reliant on white advice, often adopting a go slow attitude or focusing on fruitless negotiation that didn't achieve real change.
Leading to apathy.
Leading, BC argued, to widespread defeatism and apathy among the black population. Anger often got misdirected or just suppressed.
And this critique extended even to religion, colonial Christianity.
It did. BC argued that missionaries had introduced a colonialist-tainted version of Christianity, one that deliberately denigrated African customs and beliefs, calling them pagan and barbaric. This was often coupled with, scare tactics about hellfire, which created divisions within communities and actually weakened black resistance by undermining traditional social structures. The church itself in South Africa came under heavy criticism for its appalling irrelevance, as BC saw it, focusing on moral trivialities, individual sins, while tragically ignoring the massive systemic injustice, the poverty, the oppression that defined black life.
Despite having mostly black members.
Exactly. Despite overwhelming black membership, the church was largely controlled by whites. So it seemed unable or unwilling to meaningfully address black suffering or act as a force for liberation. In response, you saw the rise of black theology. This was a radical movement aiming to redefine the Christian message, make it relevant to the black struggle. It depicted Jesus not as passive, but as a fighting God, actively standing against oppression.
A very different image.
A stark contrast to the passive, submissive image often presented by colonial Christianity. So yeah, this holistic critique shows just how deeply BC understood the multifaceted nature of oppression, attacking it from psychological, cultural, political, economic, even spiritual angles.
This level of critique, it isn't just academic theorizing, is it? It clearly comes from a deeply lived, often brutal experience. Biko's personal reflections, they really bring these ideas to life in such a visceral way. They show how these big systemic issues actually impacted daily life and forged this incredible resilience.
Absolutely. You feel it in his writing. Biko explicitly stated, and this quote is so telling, "Born shortly before 1948, I have lived all my conscious life in the framework of institutionalized separate development. My friendships, my love, my education, my thinking, and every other facet of my life have been carved and shaped within the context of separate development."
Wow, that lays it bare.
It really does.
Yeah.
It provides crucial context for his profound, intimate understanding of oppression. It wasn't something he just observed. He lived it, breathed it. He vividly described the two-faced attitude that apartheid forced upon black people, born out of this pervasive fear, feigning obedience in public, even smiling at insults from a white boss, while privately harboring deep resentment, deep anger.
A mask of survival.
Exactly. He recounted a specific story of a black assistant smiling at his boss's insults, only to reveal his bitter desire to leave when Biko prompted him privately. And he also powerfully highlighted the extreme violence, the insecurity that was just endemic in the townships, where, quote, "rape and murder are very, very common aspects of our life," contributing to this pervasive feeling of incompleteness, this constant vulnerability.
It wasn't abstract theory for him. It was daily reality.
The raw daily reality. And central to Biko's personal concern was fighting back against the dehumanization that relentlessly tried to strip black people of their manhood, their basic human dignity. He observed how this process led black individuals to become, in his words, an obliging shell, someone who looked with awe at the white power structure and accepts what he regards as the inevitable position.
That internalized inferiority again.
Precisely. It created this profound spiritual poverty that compounded the material deprivation. His core mission, really, was to instill a newfound pride in themselves, their efforts, their value systems, their culture, their religion, and their outlook to life. He saw this internal reawakening as the essential antidote, the key to unlocking real freedom.
So, talking about the mechanisms of this dehumanization, you mentioned earlier how even language itself was twisted into a tool of oppression, shaping internal beliefs almost sneakily. Can you elaborate on how Biko saw language contributing to this mind of the oppressed?
Yeah, he was incredibly insightful about this. He meticulously detailed how the very word black in English literature and everyday usage was normally in association also with negative aspects. We touched on it: black market, black sheep, black magic, anything bad, negative, omit, it was black.
Right.
He explained this wasn't just about idioms, it actively, subtly reinforced self-censure within black individuals. And this conditioning was especially powerful when, as he put it, whiteness goes with angels, goes with, God, beauty.
That constant, subtle reinforcement.
Constant, pervasive. It directly undermines self-worth.
Hmm.
And that's precisely why the slogan, Black is Beautiful, was so crucial, so revolutionary, because it challenges the very deep roots of the black man's belief about himself. It tells him, man, you are okay as you are. Begin to look upon yourself as a human being.
A direct counter-narrative.
The powerful, direct counter-narrative.
Yeah.
And he also noted how English, being completely foreign for most black South Africans, made that sense of inadequacy worse.
How?
It made black people less articulate when they had to communicate in what was seen as the dominant, powerful language. This often forced them into a subservient role in discussions with more fluent whites, leading to that profound sense of inadequacy, a feeling of not being able to fully express their thoughts, their feelings, their intelligence.
Another layer of oppression.
A subtle,
Yeah.
but really powerful layer. Part of that internalized inferiority that black consciousness aims so fiercely to dismantle.
And connecting this to the broader struggle, the regime obviously didn't just rely on subtle methods. Fear and brutal intimidation were primary tools, weren't they? Biko's own experiences show that clearly.
Oh, absolutely. The system actively used fear. Biko's personal experiences vividly illustrate this, and his reaction to it is remarkable. He recounted his own encounter with police brutality. He said, quite frankly, we had a boxing match the first day I was arrested. Some guy tried to clout me with a club. I went into him like a bull, and then he added something striking. If they beat me up, it's to my advantage. I can use it.
That's extraordinary, turning their violence against them.
In a way, yes. It wasn't just bravado. It shows his profound understanding of the system's reliance on fear and his absolute refusal to be intimidated. He even saw the potential violence as an advantage, maybe as evidence of abuse and detention, especially since a friend had recently died in jail under suspicious circumstances. He actually told his captors, according to his testimony, if you allow me to respond, I'm certainly going to respond. And I'm afraid you may have to kill me in the process, even if it's not your intention.
Defiance personified.
Complete defiance, a calculated response to a system that aimed to control every single aspect of the oppressed life, down to their reaction to violence. Show this indomitable spirit, the very spirit that black consciousness sought to awaken in all black people.
Okay, so given all this incredibly profound insight into oppression, its psychological effects, and the spirit of defiance, how did black consciousness actually propose to change things? What was the concrete strategy for dismantling apartheid? And what was the vision for a liberated South Africa, or Zania, as you mentioned? Was it purely internal, psychological, or did it have a defined political strategy?
Oh, it absolutely had a political strategy. Black consciousness was very much a political movement with clear aims and methods. A critical step, as we know, was forming the South African Students' Organization, SASO, back in 1968. Biko was instrumental, elected its first president.
And SASO was a break from previous student politics.
Decisive break. SASO explicitly rejected involvement with white-dominated organizations like NUSAS, the National Union of South African Students, even though NUSAS was anti-apartheid.
Why reject potential allies?
Because of the power imbalance. The sheer number of white students in USAS, their tendency to focus on issues palatable to white sensibilities, and, frankly, their superior articulation due to better education and resources. It meant that even in supposedly integrated spaces, black voices were often marginalized or stifled.
So structural issues prevented real equality even within opposition groups.
Exactly. This led SASO to adopt what Biko called a tough policy of non-involvement with the white world. But he was careful to clarify this. He said this policy was not interpreted by blacks to imply anti-whiteism, but merely a more positive way of attaining a normal situation in South Africa. Meaning it was driven by a deep lack of faith that whites would genuinely share power or privilege without being compelled to. And a core belief that black people needed to organize autonomously first, to build their own strength, define their own struggle on their own terms, self-reliance.
Okay, so autonomous organization. What was the strategy then? Was it confrontation?
Well, this is interesting. SASO's strategy, as Biko described it, was basically that of bargaining.
Bargaining. That sounds less confrontational than one might expect.
It does. Despite the profound injustices, Biko explicitly stated in his trial testimony, "We're not interested in armed struggle. We have stated clearly in our own documents that we are not interested either in confrontation methods, by that meaning demonstrations which lead to definite breaking of existing laws.
So not immediate violent overthrow, but building power for negotiation.
That seems to be the core idea. The goal was for a stronger, united Black voice to eventually soften the government's hardline stance, to force them, through dialogue and the sheer pressure of organized Black opinion, to accommodate the feelings of Black people. Biko saw this bargaining process not as a single event, but as a protracted one. He even suggested it might take well over 20 years of dialogue between Blacks and whites.
A long-term view.
A very long-term view. They seemed to believe history was moving logically in their direction, that ultimately any white society in this country is going to have to accommodate Black thinking. However, while prioritizing peaceful means, Biko was also a realist. He recognized the path would be protracted and depended entirely on how the nationalist government responded.
Right. If they met resistance with force.
Exactly. He acknowledged the possibility of conflict if Black resistance kept being met with overwhelming state violence. And he also noted that others within the broader liberation movement had despaired of the efficacy of nonviolence and were advocating for a military wing. So he acknowledged those different strategies existed.
Okay, this raises an important question. If BC was rejecting many existing forms of leadership Banistan leaders, sometimes even liberal allies who did Black consciousness see as the legitimate leaders of this transformation, how did they distinguish them?
Biko was very clear on this point, especially during the trial. He identified the true leaders of the Black world, not within the official apartheid structures, definitely not among the Bantustan leaders, but as those people who are now either in Robben Island or in banishment or in exile, voluntary or otherwise.
The imprisoned and exiled leaders.
Precisely. He explicitly named iconic figures.
Yeah.
Nelson Mandela, Robert Sobukwe, Ahmed Kathrada, M.D. Naidu, and he added many others. These, he said, were people who acted with a dedication unparalleled in modern times, people who had sacrificed everything for liberation. And crucially, these were the people who spoke the language of the people.
Meaning they truly represented the masses.
Meaning they understood and articulated the genuine aspirations, the suffering, the will of the Black majority. This stood in stark contrast in BC's view to the Bantustan leaders seen as sellouts or pawns, precisely because their participation legitimized the apartheid system no matter what they sometimes said.
Okay, so the ultimate goal, you've emphasized, wasn't revenge, despite all the suffering. It was a truly transformed society. What did that actually look like in their vision for Azania? What were its key characteristics?
That's right. The vision was fundamentally about human liberation for all. The ultimate goal for Black consciousness was a completely non-racial, just, and egalitarian society. A society where, quote, color, creed, and race shall form no point of reference.
A society beyond race.
Exactly. A society with free and equal participation for every citizen, where the principle of one person, one vote would be absolute. And crucially, where there would be no artificial guarantees for minority rights based purely on race.
So pure democracy, majority rule based on numbers, not race.
That was the clear advocacy. Biko unequivocally argued for entirely one man, one vote, no qualification whatsoever, except the normal ones you find throughout the world. He powerfully exposed the hypocrisy of the government implementing this very system in the Bantustans for their own ends, of course, while denying it to Black people in South Africa proper, the power country. He argued passionately that one man, one vote could work, even in communities that weren't fully literate in the Western sense. Political education happens through discussion, through hearing, through debate. He cited examples from other African nations like Botswana, Ghana, Kenya, and even pointed to traditional African governance where chiefs, who often couldn't write, still governed effectively through discussion and community feedback, proving democracy wasn't dependent on Western models.
And what about the economy? Given the deep exploitation, how did the vision address economic justice?
That was absolutely central too. BC recognized that economic exploitation was inextricably tied to racism. It created those vast disparities in wealth and opportunity. So for the future Azania, the vision proposed a judicious blending, Biko called it, of private enterprise, which is highly diminished, and state participation in industry and commerce.
A mixed economy leaning towards state involvement.
Yes, particularly in key sectors like mining and forestry, and significantly advocating for complete communal ownership of land. The goal was to ensure a more equitable distribution of wealth.
Preventing the continuation of those apartheid-era inequalities.
Exactly. Making sure resources benefited the many, not just a privileged few. BC also encouraged using black economic power collectively in the present through things like Buy Black campaigns to reinvest wealth back into black communities. Biko believed it was the duty of the vanguard political movement which brings change to educate people's outlook towards this egalitarian future. He firmly stated the black man had no ill intentions for the white man. The anger was only directed at their entrenchment in power for the purpose of exploitation.
Not against individuals per se, but the system.
The system and the power structure. He added quite confidently, we don't need any artificial majorities, any artificial laws to entrench ourselves in power because we believe once we come into power, our sheer numbers will maintain us there. And this all led ultimately to what the movement called its ultimate prize, to bestow upon South Africa the greatest gift possible, a more human face.
What an incredible deep dive into a truly transformative philosophy. So, thinking beyond South Africa's borders, how did Black consciousness see its struggle fitting into the larger global picture? What was its message, for instance, to the international community, to powerful nations like the U.S.?
Yeah, BC leaders, especially Biko, were very clear about the international dimension and the role of global powers. Biko, in that powerful memorandum he wrote to U.S. Senator Dick Clark back in 1976, directly critiqued America's, frankly, shameful role in its relationship with apartheid South Africa.
He didn't pull any punches.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He argued America's choice was stark, simple, really. Either keep propping up the existing white minority regime or definitively assist the aspirations of millions of black people fighting for their freedom.
Yeah.
He accused America of positively guilty actions, of working in the interest of the minority regime to the detriment of the interests of black people. He argued America was guided by a selfish desire to maintain an imperialistic stranglehold over South Africa's resources and strategic position.
What specific actions did he point to?
He cited things like heavy investments by American corporations, extensive bilateral trade, cultural exchanges in sport and music, which normalized the regime, and joint political ventures like the Vorster-Kissinger exercise, referring to diplomatic engagements. He called these explicit sins that bolstered the minority regime.
So, demanding a fundamental policy shift from the U.S.
Drastic reexamination, yes. He asserted that a mediator needs to have clean hands, strongly implying America's hands were far from clean due to its complicity. He emphasized that the winds of liberation were sweeping across Africa. Change in South Africa was inevitable, making America's role even more critical in deciding whether that change would be peaceful or violent.
And within South Africa itself, pivotal moments like the 1976 Soweto uprisings. How did Biko and BC interpret those events? What lessons were drawn?
Soweto was absolutely pivotal, and Biko observed its impact keenly. He noted that the uprisings profoundly diminished the element of fear in black people's minds, especially among the youth.
A turning point in psychology.
A major psychological turning point. He reflected that before Soweto, particularly in the mid-60s after earlier crackdowns, black people were terribly scared of involvement in politics. But after Soweto, many black people have come to appreciate the need to stand up and be counted against the system. The uprisings powerfully merged the young and the old generations in resistance. The youth showed incredible courage. They were not prepared to be calmed down even at the point of a gun. This demonstrated lack of fear, Biko argued, was a very important determinant in political action. It signaled a new, much more defiant phase of the struggle.
Even despite the horrific cost, the deaths.
Even despite the tragic deaths of nearly 500 young black people. Biko believed, tragically but pragmatically, that this immense sacrifice served as a useful weapon in uniting the generations, forging a shared commitment to defiance that hadn't been seen before on that scale.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, the path forward, Biko saw it as a long haul, right? Not a quick victory.
Yeah, absolutely. He viewed the whole change process as going to be a protracted one. He recognized there was no timetable for liberation, acknowledging the fluid, unpredictable nature of political struggle. How long it would take, he believed, depended entirely on the degree to which the nationalist government was prepared to cling to power. Their intransigence would only prolong the struggle and likely make it more painful.
And what about unity among the liberation movements themselves? ANC, PAC, BC, did he see them coming together?
Despite the strategic differences and SASO's initial focus on black exclusivity, Biko personally desired fewer liberation groups, not more fragmentation. He expressed a deep hope later on for a united liberation front, one formed by the major players ANC, PAIDRI, and the Black consciousness movement itself. He believed that when black people are so dedicated and so united in their cause that we can effect the greatest results. He held firm to the belief that what he called the righteousness of our strength, The moral force and growing unity of the black majority would ultimately prevail, forcing the accommodation of black interests and the eventual realization of that non-racial lasagna.
What an incredible journey, really, through a truly transformative philosophy. We've unpacked how Black consciousness, driven by figures like Steve Biko, was this profound call for, well, psychological liberation, first and foremost, then Black unity, cultural reaffirmation,
Yeah, and a really unsparing critique of white power structures, of false solutions like the Bantustans or superficial liberalism.
while always holding on to that clear, unwavering vision for a truly non-racial, truly egalitarian Azonia.
It really highlights that idea that true liberation has to begin within, with the mind of the oppressed, as Biko said. By asserting your identity, organizing collective power, a group can fundamentally shift the dynamics, even when facing overwhelming force. It's a message that I think really does transcend its original time and place.
It demonstrates that struggle for justice is so deeply intertwined with self-perception, with collective will, reminding us that power isn't just in institutions, but can reside in a unified human spirit.
Well said. It's about recognizing your own humanity and demanding others do too.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener, today? As you reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider, how does that concept of the mind of the oppressed still manifest? In various forms, maybe subtly, maybe not so subtly, individually or collectively, even in contexts far removed from apartheid South Africa.
That's a powerful question.
And maybe how can the principles we've discussed, collective self-definition, that relentless pursuit of true humanity, the importance of holding on to an unwavering vision, how can those be applied? Maybe in your own spheres of influence to challenge injustice, to build mutual respect. What really stands out to you from this deep dive?